The Stone Carvers Guild Podcast is a part of the Stone Carvers Guild organization, which is a fantastic organization. Don't y'all agree?
Oh, yeah, it's great. And it's cheap, too.
It's well worth the price of admission.
It is, for sure. You can find out how to become a general member at stonecarversguild.org. There's a Get Involved section. And I've been a member of the Stone Carvers Guild since its inception. It's been an unbelievable resource as far as the knowledge. How did you describe it, Joel?
Oh, it's a living library of knowledge that the stone carving world otherwise is sort of hard to break into if you are looking around for it. I'm a general member. I'm not a full-time stone carver, but I love it from kind of a hobbyist, part-time perspective, but looking to learn more, and found that through the Stone Carvers Guild, through its forum, and through being able to connect easily with other like-minded folks like Bethany and Matthew.
Yeah. So if you want to be a general member, it's just $40, and you would have access to the resources, which include the forum, and then you can log on and you could ask Matthew questions on the forum.
Or anyone else.
Or anyone else.
And also there's the annual meeting, which I just love because once a year, getting together and sharing stories is an unbelievable experience. And that's something that's also available to general members.
Attend a general meeting or even become a professional member, which has other benefits as well. You just have to go to stonecarversguild.org and click on Get Involved at the top.
Join today.
Welcome to the Stone Carvers Guild Podcast. Here you will meet a variety of carvers working throughout North America. Drawing on our collective experience, we seek to share knowledge about this ancient art and to do our part to ensure that stone carving will play an important role in built environments for generations to come. So whether you are an experienced carver, new to the craft, or just curious, put on your safety goggles, open up your mind, and welcome to the workshop.
All right, welcome to the Stone Carvers Guild Podcast. I'm Joel.
I'm Bethany.
And I'm Matt Johnson. I like that the 2 years in, we're still working on this introduction thing.
That's okay. It's an ongoing thing. No, we've got a good podcast today. But before we get to that, as promised, we have some 5-star reviews to read.
Ooh.
And guys, I'm going to read them, and
So
you
just
react.
to clarify, the deal
ahead.
is that if we get a 5-star review, we will read it and interact with it.
Within reason.
Within reason. I don't know. Somebody gives us 5 stars and then just leaves us writes a scathing review. I'm okay with that because the algorithm's not going to know any different.
Well, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. Yep.
This one is not scathing. Let's go from there. Mark M.J. with 5 stars says, so much to learn. I started listening 1 month ago and just caught up with all the episodes. I took my first carving class after listening to the episode with the main stone carvers in July, and now am hooked. It is so interesting to hear these highly skilled guests and hosts all learning from each other. Sometimes a guest will say, we all know how to, and Matt, Joel, and or Bethany will say, I don't, which is certainly what I was thinking myself in that moment. It shows the value of this living library to novices like me and lifelong professionals. For such an ancient craft, it is fascinating how much there is for every level of artist to learn.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
We need to hire him to do PR for us or something.
Well, I think that we could definitely workshop that review into our mission statement because that's the goal, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To learn.
Asking the otherwise
That's fantastic.
obvious questions. That's our specialty.
Thank you, Mark.
There we go.
That's awesome.
Very good.
That's right.
Now, this one, technically not a 5-star review, but it was just so good that it was on a platform that doesn't have stars, but it was in the comment section, so we got to read it. All right.
Are we not naming the platform?
We could do it. It's Reddit. It was in Reddit. It's in the stone carving Reddit subreddit.
Reddit.
Okay. Thank you, Reddit. All right. Love this podcast. The trio who host this podcast are funny. When Bethany is like, you can ask Matthew all the questions on the intro, I smile every time. Great questions, great convos. That was from the Daily Darren. Thank you, Daily Darren.
Yay.
David Darren. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, this is fun. People leave us more 5-star reviews. I want to read them.
I love it.
More.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, on that note, we've got a 5-star worthy interview coming at you with a guy that Matt connected us with. Matt, tell us more.
Yeah.
Michael Imber is just a tremendously well-respected architect down here in Austin and Texas, but really throughout the country. And I've had the privilege of working with him on some projects and have learned from him on every project. And we talk a little bit about that. And I just thought it was a really fun conversation. I felt like I learned a lot during it. You know, I think that's the goal of every conversation, is for us to learn a little bit and hopefully communicate that. And this one does it, I hope.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll have to see from the next reviews.
We will see. No, it was very interesting and continues to expand sort of the breadth of the podcast to stone carving adjacent professionals but their perspectives also on this craft. So very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of the unexpected thing for me about that podcast was just that I thought that the vision that he had, I don't want to give too much away, but he talked about how he does a party when he finishes something, and the idea of all of the people that come to the party, they can point out how they contributed. And I just thought that was such a beautiful vision. Like, I want to go to one of his parties. I want to help him build a house and go to one of his parties. So Matthew, you have to tell us what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah, the next time I get a chance to work with him, maybe you can be my +1, Bethany.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. I found it a pretty inspiring interview. And thank you for arranging it too, because he talks about the ICAA, the
Institute of Classical Art and Architecture.
Yeah.
ICAA.
I had heard of him I think I had heard of him through the ICAA back in like a previous lifetime when I was trying to do architectural rendering. And so I was contacting all these different architects to offer my services. And when I got to Michael Imber's website, I read it and saw that he does all of his own drawing and painting, and was like, oh, well, better not contact him because he definitely doesn't need me. But I remembered seeing his drawings, and anyway, thank you for coordinating it. I had heard of him previous even to like my heavy involvement in stone carving, and it was really cool to see more of the big picture of like what we're all a part of. So yeah, everybody keep listening because it's fun.
That reminds me, one of the things that we don't want to give too much away, but what we talked a little bit about ICAA, but one of the things that they do in the Texas chapter, I know, is they will occasionally have these meetups where they'll go and they'll do rendering collectively. Like they'll all just get together and like, hey, let's paint this, this building, or let's paint this landscape, or
cool.
And, that's something that ICAA Texas chapter does. I don't know if all the chapters do that.
Such a great idea.
We'll get into it, but good conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
Let's dive in.
And our guest today is Michael Imber, architect of some renown. I was going through the awards that you've received. Just this year, you received the Palladio Award, and you've also had a book come out like in the last couple of years, The Art of the Architect.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. Lovely to be with you here. Yeah, we've been fortunate to, a lot of our projects are award-winning, but yeah, I recently wrote a book. There's a lot of discussion about architectural education today and the craft of drawing, and so many schools have eliminated drawing from their program. And so the argument in my book is that, computers are great. We need computers. They're an amazing tool. We rely on them more and more, but we can't forget this original craft of the architect, which is drawing. And so that was the purpose of the book.
It's interesting because some of our other guests, stone carvers, have talked about how drawing is the essential skill of carving as well, because for the same reasons that it can't just be tools and, technology. There's something about the connection that goes through the hand, onto either paper or stone or.
Yeah, it's that. Well, I'm glad you say that because, and that's why I call it a craft, is because, it's the very same with carving. If you do carving enough, it becomes your first language. If you draw enough, it becomes your first language, meaning that there's no translation from the mind to the hand and to what you're drawing, as opposed to a computer is this intermediate interpreter, if you will. And so when you draw, it's this direct cognitive connection to the brain. And so I would imagine stone carvers go through the same thing, that you carve enough and you don't have to think about what you're carving. You're just carving what's in your head.
Yeah, it turns into sketching almost,
Yeah.
I know, and then refinement.
I'm trying to think of which guest it was that said, if it can be drawn, it can be carved.
I think that was Nick Fairplay. I'm curious, one of the reasons that I really wanted to have you as a guest is because of your commitment to classical architecture and, of course, to the classical crafts that accompany that, like stone carving. What is it about classical architecture that drew you, but also clearly your commitment to it is founded in what must be a belief that it matters? Can you tell us a little bit about that process of discovery?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Texas, primarily West Texas, Midland, which is out in the middle of nowhere. And we'd take these long trips, and my father would always point out these old, stone ranch houses scattered throughout the landscape, and the old frontier forts. And I just fell in love with them. And, they were so much a part of the landscape and built of the landscape. And so, when I went to school, that's what I focused on. I tried to learn as much as I could about vernacular architecture. And then when I graduated, I ended up going to the East Coast and wanting to learn more about American architecture. And that brought me to the auspices of an architect by the name of Alan Greenberg, who at the time was the preeminent classicist in the country. And he immediately put this West Texas boy on designing the mantle and overmantle for the Deputy Secretary of State's office, which was of the Ionic order. And so I had to very quickly learn how to draw an Ionic capital, which, if you know your classical architecture, it's not something that's easy. It's this,
Right.
this
A good beginning task, right?
yeah, a rolled scroll, and it gets even more complicated if it's pulvinated and kind of fleshy and begins to take on life. And so at that point, I absolutely fell in love with classical architecture, which is somewhat of a natural because, Alan Greenberg explained architecture itself, the traditional architecture, is it's a river. And, if you have, classicism running down the middle, which is this language of Western culture, then you have all these tributaries that go off to, do you have, the vernacular architecture of the American West, or do you have, the architecture of the American South, or do you have, the architecture of Southern Provence? Where do these tributaries go? How do people think about beauty? How do they use the resources on hand to build shelter and to build the buildings that they need, as well as create some sort of symbolic meaning with these materials. And so, today I feel as though, and I don't want to go down this wormhole, but with modern architecture today, we've lost both beauty and we've lost both meaning. If we talk about meaning, it's like modern art. Well, it means something to the architect or to the artist, but it doesn't have much meaning that can be found in general public or within our culture. So, in
That's
short,
one of my favorite wormholes, by the way, is to let's do the connection. I think to modern architecture is so I don't know. It seems transitory. It doesn't seem like it just happens or doesn't. And then I mean there are a few modern architectural buildings that I really like, but I don't ever identify with them reliably the way that a really classic structure.
right. I mean, there may be some innate beauty that connects with you in a modern structure, just as modern sculpture does. But does it have a larger cultural meaning? Sometimes perhaps, but it kind of lacks that permeance that traditional architecture has.
Are there any tributaries that you have found that you live in, go down, would like to, or have in the past and have grown fond of it, or saying I'm staying away from that tributary?
Well, there's a lot of those. They usually have a worm on the bottom of the bottle, but I think that's a really great question, Joel. There's always been this very strong bent in the last couple of decades by the AIA on sustainable architecture, or green architecture, or whatever you want to call it. It's become so prescriptive, however, it never really fit with our view of architecture. And prescriptive in a way that it required you to use, mass-produced materials that had certain ASTM standards and certain performance standards to be able to add up all the points to say that you're sustainable. Of course, we believe that traditional architecture is sustainable because it's long-lasting and adaptable. But what the wormhole that we're really getting into is really pressing this idea of how sustainable traditional architecture is. And so what we've been stretching is this idea of materiality, using materials from the land. Recently, we've introduced a traditional technique of building self-supporting masonry vaults at a college we're doing at Michigan. And it's the largest self-supporting vault system that's been built in the last 75 to 100 years in the U.S. And at the same time, it's saved us $250,000 on this project. These things aren't easy to do because of how codified architecture and building has become. For instance, it was incredibly difficult to find an engineer that would sign off on this Boveda vaulting system. You have this traditional building system that's been used for literally thousands of years, has been tested in earthquake zones, is a proven method of building with masonry, and it's almost impossible to get a modern engineer to sign off on it. It's an innate understanding by the mason of what works, as opposed to the mathematics and the materials and the being able to have an ASTM of a certain brick that absorbs the mortar, that creates the adhesion that holds it in place, and all these things that a mason knows by heart. That an engineer can't open a book and apply a formula to.
Right. Is there kind of a general, like that's true for stone, is there kind of a push away in a lot of, or a pressure to use manufactured materials just across the board for that reason? Because then, all that, yeah.
Well, I mean, think about it. We're no longer a profession, right? But we have a responsibility to our clients.
Right.
We have professional standards. We have insurance. We have all these things that play into our practice that if you go outside of the box, then you put yourself at risk and you potentially put your client at risk.
Right.
And so the system is built against it. And it's not that it's proven, such as these, traditional vaulting systems, but you've got to be able to convince a client that these will stand the test of time without, having the convention of modern construction stand behind it.
And how did you do it? I mean, you said it is being built.
Well, that was easy, Bethany. What happened was simply because they were able to keep the critical path of the building going forward while we built the self-supporting masonry structure underneath the building, we were able to save $250,000 from the project. And so the client said, yeah, well, with number one, the builder wouldn't hire them because they weren't unionized. And they didn't have insurance. So the client said, yes, we'll hire them separately. We'll insure them. And we'll be responsible for them. And so that takes a really unique client to be able to stretch outside of the box and say, we believe in this. It's favorable to the project in many ways. We're going to stand behind it. But that's unusual.
Wow. Can you tell us more about your use of stone? Like, for instance, I'm looking at your website and there's the Medina house, which looks like it's all masonry. Beautiful.
Yeah, that's a fun house. That's a house we did for one of the Dixie Chicks way back in the day. And it was an addition to a small house. The original house was built by a theater set designer from New York using the rock right out of the Medina River, just adjacent. And so we had set, when we talk about sustainability, we had determined, okay, we're going to use the materials right out of the river.
Wow.
The cedar posts that we're going to be using, we're going to harvest from the ranch. And so that was one of those projects that we really tried to use the materials off the land on which it was built.
Mm.
On a project like that, is that something that like the client is just like totally on board with, or was there some persuasion that this is the way to go?
On that one, not really. She was on board, completely, 100%. And since we've done a couple of projects where we've tried to harvest as many materials from the land, as opposed to import them.
Wow.
Our latest project just recently completed up near Fort Worth. We built of Granbury stone, which came from a quarry just 15 miles down the road. And it wasn't only
Granbury, beautiful material.
It was the absolute most beautiful and appropriate material for the project, but it was right there.
I've read that, I guess there's a school of thought that using the material that if you stick to the material that's local, like it's gonna weather well, it's gonna sit well with the landscape. Is that, where did I read that? Is that something have you heard the theory, or is that?
That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to weather well, right? I mean, you can have a soft, caliche stone, that,
right,
for instance, was a traditional material here in San Antonio for people who couldn't afford, real limestone. So, I mean, for instance, caliche block is much softer than limestone, and so that meant that they would have to plaster over the caliche, and that created the certain aesthetic of those neighborhoods, right? So, but to your point, Matt, that it's not only of the landscape, but it's of the culture, because what you have is, take the Texas Hill Country, you have all these Germans come over from Europe. They have all of these building traditions that they carry with them, as well as aesthetic preferences, as well as cultural preferences in building. And they've got to adapt to the local materials. And so, they start figuring out, okay, we have to use live oak for are beams. Well, live oak only has a certain span because the trees don't grow that tall in
Right.
central Texas. They're going to use limestone because that's what's available there. And so then that ends up impacting the aesthetic and creating a unique architecture of place and culture because you have the two coming together as one.
Interesting.
As you're coming up with these projects, is it the design first or the material first? Do you do an examination of sort of what's available to you and then go from there on the design, or vice versa? What comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, this may sound corny, Joel, but what I like to do, especially in these dramatic landscapes, is that I'll go out and sit and do a watercolor painting of the landscape. And it's not only a visual thing, it's an experiential thing. It's that sitting there for an hour as you paint the scenery, right? You're not only visually seeing what's in front of you, you're also feeling, the heat of the sun. You're noticing how the clouds pass a shadow over the landscape. You're hearing the crickets buzz next to you. You're feeling the wind and the breeze, and you're experiencing that place, and you're slowing everything down to where you become a part of that landscape. And so to us as a firm, it starts there, that really truly understanding that moment in time, that place. And then you can begin to understand how the architecture becomes a part of that. Now, and then you expand that out into the local materials and the more you're able to do that sort of thing, the more the house belongs to that location.
Is that a process that you discovered, that you learned from mentors? What was? Have you always done that, or is that something that's come about as you've gained experience? The process of sitting with faith and.
It's funny. I've never been asked that before, but I think when I was a student, I had to go pick up Antoine Predock, the famous modernist architect from New Mexico, from the airport for a lecture. And he talked about how he would go out and camp out on the site and get to know the site or whatever. It all turned out to be bullshit, right? He maybe did it once. But I thought, wow, that's it. You've got to get to know the site. But as I travel with the sketchbook, it was something that I noticed, quite distinctly, is that when you sit and you paint, you really slow things down and you really begin to understand a place. And so really began to apply that to our projects, decades ago. And it's really become a part of our process.
It's so clever because of the time, as opposed to going out, and I think a lot of people's instincts would be like to take an iPhone and shoot a bunch of photos and then go back to the office and blow them up and look at them, and that process would rob you of the time that you're talking about to watch the shadows move and to feel the space. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and all of our projects, there's this internal and external quality to them. That how do you feel about the landscape from within the house and what you're looking at, and how do you feel about the house when you're in these outdoor spaces? How do you feel about the house when you're looking through the landscape back towards the house? All of that is informed by that early process. And the biggest reward for us is when a client is how did you know that this view was going to feel this way when this was built? And it becomes, it's not mathematical, it becomes innate through the process.
So I'm going to reveal a geeky side of me. I know, shocking, Matthew and Bethany. But I love Lord of the Rings, and in the sort of behind the scenes of the Fellowship of the Ring, they were sort of looking for shoot locations, and they came across this hilly farm in New Zealand for a possible Hobbiton place. And the conceptual artists were John Howe and Alan Lee, and they just instantly pulled out their sketchbooks and sat there, and an entire day pretty much just saw instantly Hobbiton just form on this otherwise unassuming hilly landscape. And it just reminds me so much of, Michael, of just what you were saying. And then, of course, the magic that is born out of that, just taking time to conceptualize and look at that. Just, I don't know why, just reminded me of that for a moment, and thought I'd share that.
Well, first of all, Joel, you know way too much about that process.
Sorry. And the scenes of the DVDs, okay? Extended bonus feature.
But yeah, that's exactly it. How do you really know a place if you don't stop long enough to be a part of it?
Well, and that's, it's kind of a theme of this podcast that's kind of like a thread that's throughout, is this idea of taking time. And because obviously stone carving is not instantaneous, and this is one of the things that a lot of modern architects balk at, is that you can't get it quick enough. But just the idea of putting time into any process, whether it's, the early stages of designing the building or the craft that goes into it, you can really feel that. You can, like, when it's done, you can see that the time that goes into things in a way that maybe you can't articulate all the every instance of it, but you can feel it.
Yeah, and I like to think of it similarly to when you go visit a new city. You can roam around with your iPhone camera and snap 1,000 pictures,
Right.
And then you forget about all those places you've ever been because you didn't really truly experience them. It's interesting that we're talking about this because the other day on Instagram I saw this new reel on how AI will change architecture in terms of, you could just put in your site, it will automatically do the site analysis for you. So, there's another shortcut in understanding the site, right? But if you let AI do that, are you truly understanding the site, and are you controlling how that building responds to that site?
A bunch of questions. First of all, that sounds so beautiful. Like, that sounds so beautiful. And I imagine that a lot of the pictures on your website, the actual experience of being in the home or whatever the building is, or of being outside of it and seeing it, I'm sure that a lot is lost. Like, you only get a little taste of it from looking at pictures. And so I was wondering if you could describe maybe some of the ways in which that initial experience of being on the site and drawing and like experiencing the location, how that then translates into what you make. Yeah, can you walk us walk us a little bit more through the process and give us some specifics?
Yeah, I'm really glad you bring that up, Bethany, because I think, the thing that, one of the things I'm most proud of is when somebody actually visits one of those projects. They say, I just recently had a client from New York visit a project here in Texas, and they said, this was beautiful on your web page, but, normally, something that's photographed isn't as nice as the photographs, but this far exceeds what the photograph shows. And it's because of that experiential aspect that you're talking about, is that it all starts for us with conveying the experience of the landscape into the experience of how you move through the architecture, how the architecture ends up influencing your emotions as you move through it. What do you experience as you move through the front door? What do you experience as you drive into the driveway? Is it a crunch of the gravel that reminds you of grandma's house? Or, do you come into a space that is small and warm and orients you before you walk into a space that's expansive and, reveals the dramatic view of the landscape? All these things. It's a lot of people will say, well, it's like a movie, right? But I don't like that comparison, one, because when you watch a movie, you're watching characters on a screen. When you read a book, however, you become the character in the book. And that's what we want you to be. We want you to be the character in the book.
In what sense? You mean like the person who is going to live in the house then, or
Well,
who's?
that person or visitors or whatever, is that the
Mhm.
architecture not only shapes your experience, but it begins to shape who you are, right? And isn't that what
Oh, as in
architecture
you're
should
not
do?
just a spectator. Right. That
Exactly.
makes sense.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
How
That's
can
really
stone
beautiful.
carvers take part in this process?
Yeah.
Ah, well, those stone carvers we were supposed to talk about. No, we work with stone carvers. We work with stone carvers all the time, and there's a whole nother level of the craftsman that we think about in our architecture. There was a book written by Peter Korn called "Why We Make Things and Why It Matters." That was just a beautiful philosophical book, and I've always taken his teachings to heart, where if you can take a craftsman who dreams about his work, he goes to bed at night, he's thinking about what he's going to get up in the morning and make, and he gets up in the morning, and it's his hands and his mind chiseling away at this stone, and he spends weeks, if not months, working on this piece, and then this piece goes into this piece of architecture. Well, eventually that craftsman dies. He's forgotten. But we as a society, the people who occupy that building, talk about sustainability. You know, we are sustaining this man's spirit through his work by experiencing his work in this building on a daily basis. And so that's how we like to view craft, is that it's not just an object. It is actually a representation of the spirit of the man.
Hmm.
That's what inspires us about working with artists, artisans, and craftsmen.
Which circling back to your discussion about AI, using the AI technology to, site design and every detail. That aspect of the craft is gets robbed, whether it's
Now, what does that give the end user in the
yeah,
end?
right. And what does that give? Yeah, the if you're in this book, what is that character that you're interacting with?
Yeah.
I think that people there is some sort of instinctive recognition of the absence of spirit in the stuff that AI is generating. But people love things that are cheap. So
Yeah. Yeah, but to own the essence of a man through his work is nothing that should be cheap.
right, absolutely not. Yeah, very interesting.
That all sounds really beautiful, and I'd love to hear, like, specifically what you have done with people that, or yeah, like what kind of stone carvers have done what for you. But and when you describe the process, that sounds really beautiful and kind of idyllic. Like, I have the image of you sitting on the hillside with the sketchbook, but I'm just curious. I'm sure that the process is very messy, and that trying to work the way that you do in the world that we live in is very challenging. Can you give us
Hmm.
some insights into, like, how do you run a company, like you're making all this happen, how do you make time to sit at the site? Yeah, like, tell us how you do it. How do you make
Well, I thank you for recognizing. um, it's not easy, right? You have to have clients who care. I mentioned Alan Greenberg early on in the conversation, and one of the things Alan Greenberg used to say is that architecture is diplomacy. And so what that means is that it's a constant negotiation. You're negotiating with your clients to get a vision, realized. You're negotiating with a city to allow you to build it. You're negotiating with professional and industry standards. You're negotiating, with the builder. You're negotiating with budgets. You're negotiating with the mason in the field. all these things that you've got to inspire and maneuver your way through to realize something. And so, when people say that AI is going to replace the role of the architect, I can't imagine it replacing the need of all those all that maneuvering that you have to go through to have something truly beautiful realized.
Mm.
It's and whenever I serve on a design jury, it's when I see something that is really beautifully done, especially something civic in the public, you realize the diplomacy that that architect possessed to be able to see that realized. It's really, that is the true art. Anybody can design something on paper, but to be able to realize it, to find the people such as the craftsmen who believe in what you do, believe in the vision to support you in that, and then also have the humility to be able to let go of that vision at a certain point and let the craftsman fulfill it.
Mm.
There's a real reward in what we do, and that's why I don't just do architecture. I that is who I am, and it's a part of what I believe in, Bethany, and
Mm.
I couldn't imagine living life a different way and not being able to work with these people who are achieving beautiful things through their hands and through this negotiation that we go through.
Do you have any diplomacy negotiation tips for that you've worked with stone carvers to say that guy really knew how to negotiate?
How are things at home, Joel? Everything's all right?
When does this come out again? Just kidding. Just kidding.
No, it's understanding people, right? And you're not going to get things done by just being a bulldozer and bowling people over to do what you want to do. You have to understand what people want to do and help them do that through what you're able to do. And that's the true art, right? Is to allow them to do what they know is right and is best, and be that medium to achieve that. And that's what we hope to be for all the craftsmen that we work with and the stone carvers and, all these amazing artisans, is that, we're that channel for them to be able to do their true art and achieve what they've always thought they could achieve. There's no larger reward for us than to have a party at the end of a project and have all of these craftsmen, from the trim carpenters to the masons to the towel setters, come through a building with their families and show them, this is what I do. Now you understand, this is what I do.
Mm.
That's the biggest reward for us.
Wow. One of the reasons that the Stone Carvers Guild podcast exists is because in the stone carving community, we're so spread out. And and so in order for us to make things, we need other people. And
Yes.
I'm wondering, like, okay, so in your vision of like this project of making beautiful things that requires a community ultimately, like what do you wish you saw more from stone carvers? Like, how do we participate in that? Like, how do we find people like you so that we can be part of that? Does that make sense?
Well, that's a really good question, because here's the thing. Typically, the more artistic you are, the more reclusive you are.
Yeah.
Because you're inward reflecting, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to pull things from deep within. So therefore, it's kind of natural that you're not an extrovert. And so, to be quite honest with you, I didn't know that there was a Stone Carvers Guild until you called me for this podcast. Now I'm really, interested in understanding who all is a part of that, because those are resources for us. I mean, we've been, for this large project up in Michigan, yes, we have some carved, classical elements or whatever, but we're looking for a stone carver who can do incredibly beautiful font, within these dedication plaques. And it's been a real challenge to find somebody who, not only can carve it, but can design it and, do something that is more unique than just, an etched font in a plaque. So, there's all sorts of nuances, that us that stone carvers can offer us, everything from shaping basic wall stone to carving beautiful classical elements to sculptural elements to even incising a delicate and artful font within a facade.
Michael, I before we go, I would love to talk a little bit about the ICAA, because I know that you've poured a lot of energy into that, and it's a passion of yours. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Institute of Classical Art and Architecture is about?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was a young lad, an intern, on the East Coast, there was only a handful of traditional practicing architects. Basically the practice had completely died. Architecture found it repulsive to emulate, history whatsoever. And so, if an architect did anything with any historical reference, it was usually cartooned or interpreted so wildly that they could say that they weren't just copying history or imitating history. Finally, there was this group of architects that understood that classicism or traditional architecture wasn't just these motifs that you just cut and paste, but it was a language, and it was a living language. And so, how do we resurrect that living language of beauty and carry it forward into the future and adapt it to our modern lifestyles? And it's interesting that from those few architects, those few offices, back in the mid '80s when I was on the East Coast, now that's grown into chapters all over the country with hundreds of members who believe in this idea of building with beauty and building within a language that has existed for thousands of years and adapting that to our modern lifestyles and moving it forward as something meaningful in our culture today. So it's really quite rewarding to see the interest that has come out of it and that it's grown so much in these last decades that we've really it's hard to know if you didn't experience where architecture was in the late '70s and early '80s to know that what a transformation of education and ability that the architectural profession and the artists and artisans that support it have come from that point to today to be able to build the buildings that we're building. It used to be said that we can't build like that anymore. That's not true. We can build like that, and we can build just as beautiful or more beautiful. We have that ability again. And the ICAA helped us do that as an organization.
It feels like that it helped like all that, like you were saying, like there was and like Bethany was saying, there's this diaspora of craft and architects, and ICAA really kind of gave everybody a community to exchange ideas in and elevate it. One of the things that a lot of the stone carvers in the guild talk about is that back in the good old days when there were, there'd be 20 carvers in a single shop, that the exchange of ideas would elevate everything, and everybody would lift up. And it seems like the ICAA does that for
Absolutely.
the whole building community.
Yes. As a community. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for participating in that. And are you a founding member of that organization?
I was the founding president of the Texas chapter.
Okay.
And although I'm not that involved with the organization today, several members of my office sit on the board and help, continue to move the organization forward.
Well, thank you for doing that. And thank you for talking with us today.
Well, this has been fun. This has been a blast. I love doing it.
I've got all kinds of questions that have been building up here, but we'll save that for another time.
Okay.
Like, how do you and Matthew know each other?
We've worked together on a couple of projects.
Very good.
Yeah. Matthew does beautiful work. Yeah, and we've done everything from, truly more canonical, classical elements to, much more interpretive stuff. So it's been a lot of fun. And
One of my favorite things about working with you, Michael, is that I always learn so much in the course of the project. It's nice to have somebody that, when you were talking about as being a diplomat, as a part of being an architect, that having someone that pushes you to be as good as you can be, and then also does have at a certain point, it's like, okay, now I'm letting go, you do it. It's really educational, and it's been great.
Well, I think that's what it's always been meant to be,
Yeah.
in this field, is this true collaboration between, architects and artisans to be able to, realize what the possibility is in art. So, okay, I've done this for you, Matt. What I would love for you to do is come do a lunch and learn at our office sometime.
Oh yeah, I would love to do that for sure.
Yeah, I would love for the kids in our office who have never had that opportunity to hear the artisan's voice, to hear it firsthand.
Sure thing. Yeah,
And understand.
Let's figure that out.
Look at that little negotiation tactic, little favor.
Yeah, right.
Learning so much today. Fantastic. Thank you. No, this has been great. Really appreciate it, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Stone Carvers Guild podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you will find us online at stonecarversguild.org. There you can find photos showing some of the things that we discussed today, additional information about our guest, and if you're so inclined, ways to get more involved with the Guild and our ongoing activities. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, we hope that you will subscribe and rate us on the podcaster of your choice. 5 stars, please. We'll be back in a month with a new episode, so until then, keep your hammer up and your chisel sharp.
The views and opinions expressed in the podcast do not necessarily reflect that of the Stone Carvers Guild. This content is meant for informational and entertainment purposes only. Thanks for listening.